Most people that heat with wood are losing half of that heat before it even reaches them. Not because of a bad stove, and not because they are burning the wrong kind of wood, because of what is missing around it. 2 additions, neither one expensive, and most working farmhouses had at least one of them installed for exactly this reason. Nobody sells you this today, because there is almost nothing to sell. Wood heat itself was never simple guesswork either. A family that depended on a fireplace or stove through an entire winter learned early which wood to burn and which to leave stacked for another season. Hardwoods like oak, hickory, and maple, properly seasoned for the better part of a year so the moisture inside the log had time to drop, burned slower, hotter, and far more efficiently than green or softwood cut the same season it was needed. Softwoods had their place for a fast morning fire to take the chill off quickly, but a family trying to hold heat through a long winter night reached for hardwood, split and stacked under cover months in advance. Stove or fireplace size mattered just as much as the fixes around it. A firebox or stove sized for a room twice as large as the one it actually heats wastes fuel finding equilibrium, while one sized correctly for the space reaches a comfortable temperature quickly and holds it there without constant tending. Families learned this by trial, often inheriting whatever stove came with a farmhouse and only replacing it once they understood exactly what the house actually needed, room by room, season by season. An open fireplace is one of the least efficient ways to heat a room that exists, and it always has been. Most of the heat a fire produces goes straight up the flue along with the smoke, and worse, an open firebox actively pulls already heated room air out through the chimney along with it, even hours after the fire has died down to coals. Families who depended on a fireplace as a real source of heat, not just a place to look at flames, and they fixed it 2 ways. The first fix was glass doors across the front of the firebox opening. Sealing the face of the fireplace while it burns forces the fire to pull its combustion air from a controlled vent at the base of the doors, instead of drawing warm room air past the flames and out the chimney. And just as importantly, closed glass doors keep drawing that same warm room air outside even after the fire is out for the night, which an open fireplace does constantly and invisibly. A fireplace with doors that stay shut once the flames die down holds noticeably more heat in the room than one left open until morning. There is a reason this pair of fixes shows up together so often in old farmhouse records, rather than as separate, unrelated upgrades. Glass doors solve the problem of heat escaping after the fire is out. A fireback solves the problem of heat being wasted while the fire is still burning. Installing one without the other leaves half the original problem untouched, which is likely why so many households that only added one eventually went back and added the second once they noticed the room still was not holding heat the way they expected. The second fix was a cast iron fireback, a heavy plate set upright against the rear wall of the firebox, directly behind the fire itself. Without one, a fire's heat soaks slowly and unevenly into brick and mortar, and much of it simply radiates backward into the chimney structure instead of into the room. A fireback reflects that heat forward immediately, working almost like a mirror for warmth, and it protects the brick behind it from the kind of thermal stress that cracks masonry over years of repeated heating and cooling. Blacksmiths across the northern states and Canada cast these by the thousands for exactly this reason, because nearly every household with a working fireplace needed one to get real heat out of it. There was a third piece to this that had nothing to do with the fireplace itself, and everything to do with the chimney above it. Every working fireplace had a damper, a movable plate inside the flue that could be adjusted or closed once a fire burned down to coals, and families learned to treat it with real attention. Left wide open overnight after the flames died down, a damper turns a chimney into a straight pipe pulling heated room air outside for hours with nothing to show for it. Closed down to match how much fire was actually still burning, that same chimney stopped bleeding heat it no longer needed to vent. It was a small habit, checked morning and night, and it made as much difference over a season as either of the 2 fixes already covered. For anyone using a dedicated wood stove instead of an open fireplace, the same underlying lesson applies, just in a different form. A smaller stove, correctly sized to the room it is meant to heat, and vented through the shortest possible run of pipe, consistently outperforms a much larger, poorly placed stove or an open fireplace straining to do the same job. Stoves built from soapstone rather than plain cast iron took this a step further. Soapstone absorbs heat more slowly while a fire burns, but it releases that stored heat for hours after the fire is out, which is why some farmhouse kitchens stayed noticeably warm long after the coals had gone cold and dark. More than one family that struggled for years to heat an entire house with one large fireplace found that switching to a single, correctly sized wood stove in the right location heated more of the house using less wood than before, not more. Wood choice varied by region the same way house design did. Families in the upper Midwest and the northern prairie provinces often relied on ash, birch, and tamarack, where oak and hickory were harder to come by, each with its own burn characteristics, but all of them seasoned the same way, split and stacked off the ground under cover, months ahead of the first cold snap, never burned the same season it was cut. A regular chimney sweep was part of this same routine, not an afterthought. Creosote, the tar-like residue left behind by burning wood, builds up inside a flue whether the fire is efficient or not. And a chimney cleaned on a predictable yearly schedule both burned safer and drew smoke out more efficiently than one left unattended for years at a time. Here is where people get it backward almost every time. They assume a bigger fire means more available heat. It does not. A contained radiant heat source will outheat an open one every single time, using the same amount of fuel, and that is the entire principle behind both of these fixes. Both additions are still made today by the same kinds of manufacturers who made them a century ago. Fireplace glass doors are sold by most companies that also make standard fireplace screens, sized to fit the majority of common firebox openings, and they typically cost less than a single month of supplemental electric heat in a cold climate. Cast iron firebacks are harder to find on a typical hardware store shelf, but several specialty foundries and independent blacksmiths still make them, sized to fit a standard firebox, as a one-time purchase that lasts as long as the fireplace itself. And checking that an existing damper closes properly and seals rather than sitting rusted half open, something any chimney sweep can confirm in minutes during a routine inspection, costs nothing beyond that visit and stops a season's worth of quiet, invisible heat loss overnight. Neither of these fixes asks you to burn more wood, cut more wood, or spend more time feeding a fire. Both of them simply stop the heat you are already producing from escaping before it ever does its job, which is the same problem families 100 years ago were solving with the tools available to them. Put together, seasoned hardwood, a fireback to throw the heat forward, glass doors to keep it from being pulled back out, a damper that actually gets adjusted, and a chimney that gets swept on schedule, and a single fireplace or stove stops being decorative and goes back to being what it was originally built for, a real, reliable, inexpensive way to heat a home through a long winter. It is worth remembering that none of these fixes were considered luxuries when they were first put into use. A fireback and a set of doors were treated the same way a family today treats a furnace filter or a smoke detector battery, an unglamorous but necessary part of keeping the house running through the season, not an upgrade reserved for people who could afford something extra. If you heat with wood, or if you have an open fireplace you have mostly given up on as a real heat source, this is worth about 20 minutes of research and less money than most households spend heating a single room for 1 week with electric backup heat. None of this asks anyone to replace a working stove or rebuild a chimney. It asks for the same thing the old fixes always asked for, making sure the heat already being produced is actually reaching the room instead of quietly finding its way back outside. Thanks for watching. And if you want more of the forgotten fixes that kept northern homes warm on far less fuel than we use today, subscribe for the next one. Tell me in the comments, what is the biggest heat loss problem in your own house right now? I am building the next video around what people tell me here.